I'm looking forward to what you all are doing.
I'm super excited to be a part of what you guys are doing.
The mold that you all are building is a powerful thing.
I've been watching how you guys have been collaborating. And I just want to applaud you. I'm watching you guys. I'm learning from you. I'm admiring you. So thank you for having me on.
Hey, this is Seth Yolorda.
Yo, what's going on? This is Pastor Noah Weinstein.
This is Pastor Tina Carriger.
I'm Pastor Shaon Martineau.
This is Pastor JD.
This is Pastor Kimberly Mann.
What's up, everybody? Pierre Quinn here, and you are watching Recharge.
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 Recharge. You are watching Recharge Worship.
Welcome, everyone. This is Recharge Worship, and today we have a special guest. As you all know, we're dealing with the series this whole month of October. I'm tired of being tired, and so we have our brother, our friend, and he is a specialist. His name is his name is Shaon Martineau. And we're so glad to have him with us today. We're talking today about trauma. If you all just would recall the trauma that we're currently dealing with as a nation, and they kind of bring it home for us. We want to deal with the trauma and how we can navigate through this time, not only in our own personal space, but also as a nation. And so we have our brother Shaon Martineau with us to lead us through to discuss how to deal with our trauma. But we just want to take this time just to welcome him into this space. Shaon Martineau, thank you so much just for being willing to be with us on today. Yeah. Thank you for your time. We're excited to be here. Of course, we have my sister there, Pastor Janelle Monroe, and we're excited here, as well as Pastor Kyle Crawford, as we are just navigating through the space of trauma. If we were just to kind of get through this space, what would you define trauma as?
Man, so first let me say it's really good to be with you guys. Been following what you guys been doing, really like it, and so my hat's off to everything that you're doing. Jumping right into it. So when we talk about trauma, when I hear the word trauma, I also hear pain. And that association, I think, is very common. The first time I ever heard of the term trauma, it was something called blunt force trauma. And I think it was on a TV show or something I was watching, and it was in reference to kind of like a gruesome accident. But when we think about trauma in this sense, or in kind of the nature of what you guys have been covering here, there's really three types. So we talk about acute trauma, which is just kind of like a one-off incident. You might have experienced an earthquake, you might have been mugged, you know, something just like one time happened and it triggered a certain response within you. Then there's chronic trauma. That's like exposure over long periods of time to a particular stressor. Usually when we talk about chronic trauma, one of the things that you'll hear is abuse. So whether it was childhood abuse, abuse in a relationship, friendship, and it's not just physical, it could be emotional, and it can even stretch out to spiritual abuse. And I don't know a whole lot about that, but I was kind of doing some research on our conversation today. I saw that as one of the things that definitely popped up. And then lastly, there's complex trauma. So complex trauma is kind of like what happens when you get triggered, or there is you have a stress response to a traumatic event. You get away from that traumatic event, and then, you know, maybe a couple months later, maybe even a few weeks later, you're re-exposed to that. And so you have like certain responses within your body, within your mind, and just within your general life experience that might react to that trauma. And it just happens kind of on and off, and it just makes it complex. So yeah, those are the three main types of trauma that we consider it, like in the mental health world. I don't know if there are any others, but yeah, those are the three.
So that was definitely insightful, because I have never heard of anything such as complex trauma. So you better teach on here today, okay? I think the question that
Go ahead.
The question that I have for you is, so what would you say are signs, that someone is functioning out of their trauma? Because I know there is such thing as like trauma response, to where people may be in situations where they feel like they're triggered, and they may have certain behaviors that may be considered erratic, but actually are a response of their trauma. So what would some of those, symptoms or actions look like?
Right. So this conversation is so timely for me because I just did a trauma-focused training. I just finished it up last week. And one of the things that was really interesting that they said in the very beginning of the training was that it's not that you don't see trauma, it's that you don't know that you're seeing it. And when we consider that, there's what's called the ABCs of trauma. So A would be affect. So how is this person presenting versus what they typically would? There are many of our friends, many of our loved ones who are they're positive, they're happy-go-lucky, they're always kind of bubbly and shiny, and they do those kind of things. I'm extremely laid back, so that's not me. But noticing a change in their affect, so they go from being that bubbly, loving person to now they're sad, they're angry, they're numb. Even sometimes you see like what's called affective dysregulation. So in this sense, it's the kind of up and downs of the mood changes and things of that nature, and them kind of not necessarily acting like who we think they, who we peg them to be. When you think about like the B of the ABCs of trauma, you're talking about behavior. So what is this person actually doing? When we look at trauma responses, you're going to see a lot of avoidance. So these are people that typically maybe they were hanging around, they were doing their thing. If we're talking about it in a church context, maybe they were active. They were going to the AYs, and they were an active member during the divine worship service, and they were active in their small groups. And now all of a sudden they just shut out. They go ghost. I know for me, a few years ago, I dealt with a lot of that avoidance. So I'm like here 1 minute and gone for 3 months next, and a lot of it stemmed back to some of my own personal trauma and experience of trauma and how I learned how to deal with it. So it was a little maladaptive. But then you also think about like other things like self-injury, substance abuse, and even certain risk-taking behaviors that the person might not have typically engaged in before. Next, you talk about cognition. This is our thoughts. A response to trauma could look like kind of like defeated thoughts. Being extremely critical of ourselves. Because maybe we felt like in the moment of whatever happened, we could have or we should have done something differently, and so now we create a certain belief system based on that idea of like, I should have been able to, know or see the signs of this coming, but I didn't. And so now I'm constantly in my head about that. And I'm, telling myself certain stories about who I believe myself to be. Like maybe I'm a failure, or maybe, I'm no good, or I can't get right. Those sort of ideas are very prevalent in trauma. So then you look at also, the trauma experience is something, when we experience trauma, if it's prolonged or complex or, chronic, if it's just between like the chronic or the complex, there are some real biological reactions that we can have to the experience of trauma. Constant exposure to that can wear down because it creates a bunch of stress within our bodies. And I work as a marriage and family therapist here in Southern California. I'm an associate. I'm not licensed yet. I'm actually waiting to take my test. I've finished my hours up already. But I've seen in a lot of my older clients, they were exposed to traumatic events. And it could be anything from like sexual assaults to fights to really emotionally abusive family members, parents, things of that nature. And then it creates a level of stress that they kind of learn how to live in. The problem is there is a biological response to living in some of the stress of trauma. And so we see certain chronic pain conditions and I'm not a medical doctor, but there are other physical responses that we see our body kind of reacting to it and our body breaking down a little bit more as we get older. So I hope I'm not going too far off the deep end, but those are some ways that we see trauma kind of show up in real time, in real life, not just in ourselves, but also in others.
So when we recognize our trauma, I think you alluded to it. A lot of us, we will kind of brush over it and avoid actually dealing with the trauma. And so on today, like, are there ways that we can engage effectively with dealing with our own trauma instead of avoiding it? Because I know for just personal experience, sometimes you want to deal with it right away, and sometimes you're just like, I never want to deal with that. So how do we actually get to a point where we're willing to deal with our own trauma?
If I told you that it gets worse if you don't talk about it, would you believe me?
Yes, absolutely.
And the reason why I throw that out there is because that phrase, that saying, it's very true. One of the important things that we have to consider in regards to dealing with trauma is our ability to have the resources to really talk about it. Now, for many in our community, in minority communities and in the church, talking about trauma, talking about mental health, it's very taboo. Unfortunately, even in 2020, we still deal with the stigma. Now, in the last couple of years, we made, some strides in being able to comfortably have the conversation a little bit more, but we still got a mountain to climb in regards to tearing down the stigma, especially among some of the older generations. Not to call them out old people out or anything like that, but I think it does remain true that there is a level of resistance there. But the truth of the matter is we have to talk about it. Now, I am a therapist. I love what I do. I advocate for what I do, but I also realize that in a very real way, there are many of us who don't trust the therapists and who may actually have systems that we already belong to, whether it's family members, whether it's friends, whether it's churches, or other community agencies that we can go to and we can let out. We can actually, really express, how we're experiencing life. And those things are very, very important. Just having the access to people that we can, in a very trusted manner say, hey, I was here. This reminded me of something I went through in my childhood, and I just want to talk about it. And one of the wonderful things that we can do is just lend an ear. I think that there's sometimes we kind of create a burden to, have all the answers. And one of the beautiful things that I have learned is that it's okay not to know, but it's even better to be there in your not knowing. So I cannot know, but as a friend, I can still sit with you. I can still, try to kind of understand your experience of pain. And I can, kind of walk alongside you as you seek maybe greater levels of help than, what I could offer you. And so having the conversations with trusted people. And if we don't have those trusted people, I was watching last week's episode, and I saw that one of the things that was said was, if you don't have those trusted people, then of course, come talk to a therapist, talk to a professional, and there are resources, there are ways in which we can help. Don't get kind of scared about the, cost or whatever, because there's a lot of programs and a lot of agencies that can help you tap into the professionals that that you could use. So yeah, those are it's talking about it. That's the main answer to your question, I think.
So I think it was so powerful just now how you said, sometimes we just need somebody to be there in our not knowing. And like, as soon as you said that, I was like, man, somebody's going to wrestle with that, because we always feel like we have to know what to do whenever people come and tell us, about what's happening in their life, and I appreciate you telling us, it's okay to talk to your family members or your friends, whoever is lending a listening ear. I think my question to that would be, so how do we know, how much to share until it's time to take it to somebody who is, professionally certified and equipped in order to help us to navigate further
So I think
through
the
our trauma?
unfortunate answer to your question, at least in my opinion, is that some of it is literally trial and error. One of the major issues that can happen in a family is someone can be messy. We put our trust into someone, we think we can tell them certain things, and then all of a sudden we feel betrayed. And so you don't really have a lot of control over that. But if I'm sitting on something and it's really affecting everything that I'm going through, I can't focus. I can't do the things I typically do. And now all of a sudden, I see you as someone that I can talk to. Like that's a great thing. It speaks volumes to the relationship that we have, and it also speaks volumes to the potential for healing that's here. But one of the awesome things that we can do, in addition, if we're the person that's being talked to about this issue, is know our boundaries, know our limits, know that, hey, you're telling me something that actually might be triggering to me. And it's not that I want to hurt you, or it's not that I want to, make you feel uncomfortable, but at some point, maybe let's both go talk to someone, about this, or maybe I could take you to the office and sit in the lobby while you go do that. One of the great experiences I had with a client was she came in, and when I came out to see who she was, it was two people. They looked just alike, and of course I had never met them. So I called out the name, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, they're both coming back to talk with me. And no, one person was just there to sit in the lobby and wait until the session was over, and it was just that kind of level of support. So the first part of the answer for your question is, unfortunately, I think some of that is trial and error. We really hope that the people that we want to talk to about this stuff has great intentions. And the second part is, if I'm the person being talked to about whatever that issue is, I need to be upfront. I need to be honest. I need to have certain boundaries, just in case I can't help you. And so I think that's how I would answer that question.
Shaon, man, we really do appreciate you just just putting us up on game and just really allowing us to understand trauma. I never knew that there were three different components of trauma. We talk about the acute and then also the complex, and also the middle one that is slipping my mind. The chronic, right? So like, we find ourselves in every situation within these three. How is it that we can separate to identify which one we're actually in?
Right. So acute, again, is going to be one-off. So when we think of acute, it's like one incident, and for whatever reason, maybe it's something we've just never experienced before. Maybe it's just it's just kind of a one-off thing, and so we experience it once. Maybe we talk to someone about it, maybe we don't, but we never experience that thing again. Chronic, and the difference is, chronic, when we creep into the chronic world, that's prolonged exposure. And, like I said earlier, one of the easiest examples to think of is abusive situations, whether it's parent-child relationship, spousal relationship, friendship, whatever. But it's that constant prolonged exposure to whatever the stimulus is. And it doesn't have to be physical. So it doesn't have to be like, you're getting beat or whatever. There's a lot of emotional abuse that happens, especially in our community. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes we don't even know that we're doing it. And so that would be the chronic. It's just kind of prolonged, like, okay, this isn't just a one-off thing. This is something I'm experiencing every single day. And I go to school or I go to work, and I'm sitting at my desk, and someone walks past me that reminds me of the abuser, or reminds me of the traumatic event, or I go to the gas station, or I go grab something to eat, and something there triggers me, and it reminds me of the constant abuse. And then I kind of like go through my disassociation. So now I'm not present. I've withdrawn, or, I have a trauma response, or I go off, and, my behavior doesn't necessarily match who I typically am. And then again, complex is maybe I was exposed to, something that triggered me in the past, and then, I get re-exposed to it a few months later, a few weeks later, sometimes even like a year, but it keeps happening. So it's, and it just becomes a little complex, because it's hard to say, okay, I know when I'll be re-exposed to this, the stimulus for my traumatic experience. You just don't know, but for some reason it shows up again, and it could be anywhere. It could be at work, church, the gas station, the grocery store, wherever. And so those are kind of your three main ones that you're going to be living in and kind of experiencing. So, yeah. Now, here's the other thing. And one of the things that I also thought was interesting in the training I took last week, the trainer said that acute distress is universal. So what he was basically saying was that at some point in our life, we will experience some sort of acute distress that might trigger a trauma response. And it's not necessarily the same for chronic or complex.
Wow. I think that was a very thorough breakdown. And now I'm sitting here trying to figure out, okay, so which one have I experienced, And I think I would just, continue to ask, what questions, I guess, would you suggest us asking ourselves, or maybe asking those of our loved ones, that could help us to begin this conversation on, how to talk about our trauma, or how to get, make someone feel comfortable, in order to talk about it. Because I know a lot of people don't even know where or how to start, with sharing. So what would you suggest, we could ask or do?
So if I understand your question correctly, you're asking what kind of questions can we ask as far as understanding our trauma in the eyes of another person? Is that
whether through another person, or even if we're just talking to ourselves, and trying to unearth our own trauma?
Right. So, one of the big things about trauma and distress in general is, the trauma response is typically something that is a little out of character for us. So I can use myself for an example. When I'm very laid back, I'm very quiet, I kind of I move in silence. I'm like the G in lasagna. But there have been times where I've noticed maybe my anger rising, or there being certain frustrations. And if there is an outburst in someone who is typically not in your face, or not, a strong presence like that, then that's a way of being aware of the trauma that you're experiencing. Now, the right questions to ask, I think it depends on the person and the relationship that you have with the person. But I think the beauty of a lot of our friendships is sometimes we don't even have to say it, that, are you okay? Are you good? I noticed you were doing, X over here, and that's not typically you. Is everything straight? And so sometimes our friends will check in with us before we even say, hey, yeah, I just got mugged. I just got robbed, or I just saw something that really made my stomach turn, and I'm not okay. I need to talk about it. So those are some of those conversations that those are some of the ways. I think the other thing is, really having conversations with your friends, hey, have you noticed, anything different in me? Or, just creating a safe space, even within the family, whether it's an intentional, once a week family meeting, which for some is realistic, others not so much, but just creating intentional times to do real check-ins and really see okay, how are you doing? How have your experiences been this week? Just creating safe spaces, whether it's at home, at work, at school, in church, wherever, where you have these trusted relationships with trusted friends that you can ask, hey, I'm not really feeling myself. Do you notice anything different? Or they can say, hey, like, what's up? You good? But just creating real like safe spaces where you can have those conversations. 2 years ago, I did a presentation at Compton Community Church in Compton. And it was very interesting because the conversation, it was almost like a town hall. And they were asking questions kind of similar to the one you just asked about, like, how do I know, like, what's the difference between, like, sadness and depression? How do I know what the right questions are to ask? And I think that sometimes there's a level of boldness in a relationship where you can really step to a person. And if we really are what we say we are, then I can say, hey, I've noticed something different. You want to talk about it? And that conversation can either lead to me supporting you and kind of holding you accountable for whatever's going on, or it can create a maybe a conversation around, okay, well, are you talking to someone outside of me about this? And I'm not a mental health professional. I don't know what you're going through, what the dynamics of this are. Do you have access to someone like that you can check in with and say, hey, I've got this trauma response. I think I might have PTSD because I've been constantly exposed to this one stimulus, and now I can't hide it. It's kind of boiling over. And so being able to just kind of have a bit of like a boldness in relationships to say, hey, this isn't personal. This isn't me taking a shot at you or anything like that, but I noticed something's different. Let's talk about it. And genuine friendships and genuine accountability partners. Unfortunately, though, there are many of us that don't have that. And if you don't, therapy is always a good place. One, to help you work on developing those kind of relationships, but also just a safe space to talk about what you're experiencing.
Wow. Shaon, man, thank you so much just for breaking that down. I know our time is kind of coming to an end with you, but there is something that you're saying to the effect of the power of the ministry of presence, right? The ministry of presence. We don't have to know everything. I think even as we're navigating through this pandemic, traumas and triggers are happening within, because a big part of who we are, especially in our communities, if we're honest, even in our Black communities, is community, and we're missing out on community. So how would you say, as we're coming to a close, what are some things that we can do to kind of do better at dealing with the triggers that come from a pandemic? That's a big question.
So I think one of the things that I kind of always sit on is like keeping hope alive. Sometimes, making the transition to a life at home, for me, it was not hard at all. I'm an introvert to introvert. I love being at home. The comfort of these four walls is a beautiful thing. But I know for many others, it's that's just not the case. But the dangerous place that we can kind of enter into is when we say, oh, I don't have any resources. I can't connect with people. You may not necessarily be able to connect with people in the way that you want to, but there are ways in which you can connect, even like social media, of course, is like the biggest platform. And of course, that doesn't replace being physically in a person's presence, but we can still celebrate the fact that there is some connection that you can gain from that. It's hard. It's not ideal, of course, but tapping into the resources that you have. The other thing is, as Adventists and, as people that have kind of come up in this message, we have the wonderful health message. And a component to that is physical health. So being able to get out and join certain activities and things of that nature are also really great resources that we can use to connect and to deal with some of the traumas. Out here in Southern California, we have what's called the IE Fellowship Riders. And of course, I haven't ridden in about 3 weeks, but it's a bicycle group that I was put onto by, my uncle, who was like, hey, we're riding. I know you just bought a bike, and you can, just come and ride with us. And man, these people are in their 50s and a little older than me, and they're dusting me. But it's great to just be outside, early in the morning when it's cool, and just around people. And so sometimes tapping into some of those smaller things might be, really great ways, because while we can't congregate, in big groups like we did before, there are still a lot of smaller resources that we can use that'll help. So that would definitely be my answer to that.
Well, we just want to say thank you so much, Shaon, for being here with us tonight. We do not take lightly when we have certified professionals in our presence, okay? Especially to talk about mental health. So we are so grateful for you being able to be here with us tonight. And of course, because we want everyone to know how they can get in contact with you, how they can follow you, purchase whatever you're working on, whatever it is, now's the time for you to shamelessly plug what are you working on, where do you want us to follow you at.
So I can shamelessly plug that I am not really that connected to social media. I'm online, but I'm not very active. But I am a therapist. I work in Southern California. If you live in San Bernardino County, I manage a military families program. It's a free program to people in San Bernardino County. If you I'm sorry, my dog is in the background making noise. I think he's ready to get out of his crate. But if you served, or if you are a member, if you have a family member that served at any point, it's a free service. You get therapy for a year. It's awesome. We have 3 great therapists, me included, of course. And it's a great program. Outside of that, the agency I work for, it's called Christian Counseling Service. We do some faith-informed treatment. And so if you're in Southern California, if you're in California in general, and you want to do some telehealth and you want to check us out, we are Christian Counseling Service of Redlands. And yeah, but as far as following me on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all that, I don't have a Twitter. I'm on Facebook. You can add me. My name is Shaon Martineau. And on Instagram, I'm at Shaon M. But I promise you, I'm probably not gonna. I don't check it very often. I'm on it. I'm scrolling. I'm watching random videos of Dobermans and all kinds of random stuff. But yeah, the notifications are never at the top of my priority list. Anyway, so yeah, that's how you can kind of get in contact with me.
Man, listen, Shaon, Dr. Martineau, we're going to speak that into existence. You're already working on it.
All that.
Listen, we're going to speak it into existence. Dr. Martineau, we appreciate your time. We appreciate your wisdom, your knowledge that you're sharing, and then also your heart for our communities as we continue to struggle through this idea of mental health, right? It's a real issue that we deal with and we oftentimes sweep over, but we want to thank you for your time today just to pour into this platform of Recharge Worship. And on behalf of Recharge Worship, we just want to say thank you. We appreciate you. And may God continue to bless you, Dr. Martineau.
Appreciate it, guys. Really do.
I'm looking forward to what you all are doing.
I'm super excited to be a part of what you guys are doing.
The mold that you all are building is a powerful thing.
I've been watching how you guys have been collaborating. And I just want to applaud you. I'm watching you guys. I'm learning from you. I'm admiring you. So thank you for having me on.
Hey, this is Seth, your Lord.
Yo, what's going on? This is Pastor Noah Weinstein.
This is Pastor Tina Carriger.
I'm Pastor Shaon Martineau.
This is Pastor JD.
This is Pastor Kimberly Mann.
What's up, everybody? Pierre Quinn here, and you are watching Recharge.
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 You are watching Recharge Worship.